In every heartache, there's a hidden seed of strength. Join Portia Booker on The Grief Grantor as we journey through stories of resilience, finding gratitude in the echoes of grief. Together, we transform sorrow into strength, pain into purpose. Welcome to The Grief Grantor, where your healing journey begins.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Grief Grantor. I am your host and your grief awareness advocate, Portia Booker. And of course, I want to thank each and every one of you for being so supportive of me on this new endeavor. Being welcome onto E360 TV's network has truly just been a dream come true. You know, really quick, you guys, I'll be honest. I haven't been having the best day, right? I'll be very transparent and honest. I have not been having the best day. But here's something I want to share with each and every one of you, right? Like I woke up a couple weeks ago where every single day I take time to write in my gratitude journal. I grab my gratitude notebook whenever I feel like life is literally hitting me like a bunch of baseballs and I'm not prepared to catch all of them. And so I write in my gratitude journal every day about how I'm grateful for my grief journey, how I'm grateful for the challenges that I encounter in my life. Well, one of the other parts of that journal, which it's a phenomenal gratitude journal because it makes you take time to really be intentional about what you're writing and it gives you other prompts to really respond to. And one of the prompts asks you to write your positive affirmations for the day. And one of my positive affirmations that I always write is today I will face my fears. Today I will face my fears. Well, a couple weeks ago, didn't expect this to happen. I go outside and take my dog, Mr. Fletcher. Those of you who know him, he goes for various rounds of pee o'clock throughout the day. I think we go for about 7 to 8 different walks a day. And of course, we go out in the front yard, and not even 5 minutes of us being outside and across the street to let him go and run around in the field. You know how dogs do. I look back by my house and somebody runs over a squirrel. And I'm like, really? Somebody ran over a freaking squirrel in front of my house. So I'm looking at it and I'm like, really? So I take Mr. Fletcher in and I'm thinking for a minute as I'm putting him back in his room. And I said, I don't want this squirrel just sitting there in front of my house all this time. The weather is weird and, just random things can happen. So I said, you know what? I'm going to take time to take this squirrel from in front of my house and just put him someplace nicer. Right. So I went outside, put my headphones in, got my shovel, dug him up. The rest is history. But the one thing I did do with the squirrel is I made him a little burial site. I put a little cross over him, like I made him out of sticks. You know how when we were little kids, we go on little adventures and, the movies that we watch really influence kind of like how we show up in the world sometimes, right? And it made me think about how in our lives, right? A lot of people would say, well, Portia, it's just a squirrel. But how many of us say it's just something with every aspect of our life, right? It's just $100 that somebody gave you. It's just a check engine light. It's just a job. How many of us actually have said that to somebody else, yet alone to ourselves? For me, taking time to bury that squirrel insinuated number one, that I faced one of my fears, right? I wrote in my affirmation, my gratitude journal that day, today I will overcome my fears. And I did. How many of us do that, for example, as our loved ones are transitioning? I've said this before that for both of my parents, I was present for both of them as they were making their transition or what I call liftoff from this world. So, for those of us who are tuning in, how many of you are going to make the time to no longer think about it as just something, right? Because to me, those little acts, those little things that we encounter in our lives are really the big things, and I'm grateful that I was able to take a moment with this squirrel to really think about even my own life. Number one, burying a part of my fears, right? Number two, paying homage and being of service, right, to this animal that unfortunately, we have to coexist, right? They're all around the front yard, all in the in the field, where we have to coexist, but being able to pay homage to them. And also number 3, really finding gratitude in where I am in my life and being able to be that person to show up, right? Like a lot of people call me to this day, like, Portia, I'm about to embark on my grief journey, or they're currently on their grief journey when somebody in their life has transitioned. And they call me because they see that I've granted myself permission to go on my grief journey. I've granted myself permission to embrace my grief in order to evolve it through gratitude, right? So for my audience, I want you guys to really think about that, right? Number 1, how are you going to face your fears today? Number 2, how are you going to incorporate gratitude into your life? Number 3, what key steps can you take today to not only face your fears, but also to really be appreciative of what you have in your life in comparison to what you do not? Because my great grandmother had a saying that we're all just passing through here, right? So how are we going to make each and every day, each and every moment count? So we're going to take our first break right here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. When we come back from our commercial break, we're going to be joined by a very special guest who I like to call converted the obstacles in her life into an opportunity for the masses. So we'll be right back here on the Grief Grantor. All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. Before we took our quick break, I mentioned a couple key things. Number 1, how are we going to face our own fears, right? Number 2, how do we incorporate gratitude into our daily life? Instead of us focusing on what we don't have, finding gratitude in what we currently do. And also number 3, how are we going to learn, right, from these lessons in our lives, right? Like what I mentioned about the squirrel. For me, burying that squirrel really attested to me stepping forward in my journey of, really paying homage and being that person in other people's lives as an example of their grief journey, right? Like me being present for both my parents as they were transitioning, really, number 1, attest to my strength. And I also want to encourage more of us to take those moments, be with people, right? Because life really is a short journey. So today I have the opportunity, before I bring her on stage, I'm going to give a little background. The individual who I have today is someone who I would call someone who learned how to convert the obstacles of their life into an opportunity, right? And after suffering what I call like the brain awake injury, right? Where, traditional healthcare modalities tend to not always work for everybody. But this individual had that drive in her heart to continue to persevere and find a solution that would eventually lead her to where she is today. So welcome to the Grief Grantor, Miss Lori Spivey. Lori, how you doing today?
Hi, Portia. Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you.
I agree, Lori. When of course, shout out to our mutual connection, Miss Annette Garsteck, and also attorney
Absolutely.
Corey Wisenot for connecting us, because when I heard about your story, I said, I have to have her on. I have to have her on because you have taken something that a lot of people experience in their life, right? A diagnosis that tends to be a death sentence, right? Because traditional health modalities don't always work for people. but that drive in your heart was kind of what I call that locomotive, like the little train that could, right? That continued to persevere, even though it might have derailed a little bit. But now you're here. So, Lori, before we dive into your journey, right? What are you grateful for today, Lori?
Well, I first want to say thank you for your transparency and your opening, and I'm grateful for you. Just that you're able to bring this connection to people. People experience grief in so many different ways, and the ability for you to highlight those different ways that we experience it is just beautiful. So, just thank you, and I'm grateful to you.
Laura, I appreciate that. It's funny story, Lori. I remember years ago through my mental health journey that I've been on, I remember I said at one point that I wanted to work with people specifically in the areas of trauma and grief because I feel like there were so many loopholes where people kept getting caught in what I call the hamster wheel of life, right? They go to this modality, doesn't work. Then they give up. Then they go to this one, same thing, it doesn't work. So it's kind of like you keep throwing darts at a chalkboard and it's not going anywhere, right? And I didn't realize that it would be through conversation that I'd be able to work with different individuals and really spark change through the power of voice. So I truly received that, Lori. I appreciate that. Lori, as I mentioned, in my introduction to you, right, you went through what I call kind of like that crash being awakened period where you got hit by a drunk driver, you had this severe brain injury that really crippled you for a period of time. And so, Lori, I want to give you the opportunity to share with our audience how that journey you found gratitude through that grief journey that you went on to reclaim and refine yourself from that period.
Yes. I would say that, I was in a season prior to that accident actually occurring where I was very anti-dependent. And when I say that, I was beyond independent, right? I wanted to prove to the world that I could do anything on my own. I didn't need anyone else to intervene at any time. And I found myself then after this car accident being in a dark room for about 6 weeks. I couldn't tolerate any sound or any stimulation at all. Would cause my brain to really what I like to say as short circuit, and I would just sob, and I didn't know what to do with what was happening with me. I had just started a job 3 months prior, and I was not eligible yet for any kind of sick leave. And what happened was my coworkers were able to donate sick time to me that they had accumulated as unpaid time for themselves. And I received this overwhelming gift of time to heal without losing a paycheck. And it was in that I found the gift of being able to receive and what it really meant. And I realized that was the first gift I was given, the ability to look beyond my own stubbornness and the need to control and be anti-dependent, and receiving the love and gifts that people truly intended to help me. And that was an incredibly humbling experience for me. I had only known these people for 3 months. And so the fact that they would give me time that they could have cashed in at some point was beyond, right? It was really amazing.
Lori, when you say that, it makes me think about so many different people who, unfortunately, they've been working longer than you, but don't have that level of support and that level of giving. And, when I think about how you brought up being in this dark room, right? This dark room where sounds would trigger your brain to short circuit, or any type of smells potentially, or, certain other elements, right, would really trigger you to fall back into that accident all over again, like the trauma of that accident.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, Lori, for you, in that dark room, what would you say was the light for you in there that would bring you a sense of comfort, a sense of peace? What was that light during that dark time?
Believe it or not, it was the physical pain that I was experiencing. I had such gratitude that I had survived this accident. I had multiple stitches in the back of my head and 18 staples. And the physical pain that I was experiencing from bruising and injury was pretty overwhelming. And I thought, thank God I can feel this pain because I'm still alive. And in looking at the car, I don't know how I survived it. And so it was gratitude immediately, just for the sheer fact that I had been brought through this, and at the time thought I would be fine. It wasn't until later I realized that things were not going quite the way I thought they were going.
Lori, I'm glad you bring up finding gratitude in your pain, right? Because things could have been way worse. We wouldn't probably be talking right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how many of us, like what I mentioned in the beginning about this squirrel, right? How many people just said, well, it's just an injury, it's just pain. But we don't realize that that pain that you experience could have ended you completely.
Absolutely.
Well, you wouldn't be here to, in a sense, share how that test that you went through is truly a testimony to the drive in your spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And Lori, for our audience, right, who's tuning in, how can they learn to be appreciative of the pain that they're experiencing in their life? And maybe what key question would you say they can ask themselves when they're going through a painful transition in their life?
That's difficult because we're all on such different journeys. And I think you and I have similar philosophies in a lot of things. For me, if I've gotten a flat tire, it's, oh gosh, what am I being saved from? Like, what am I not going to experience as a result of this flat tire? And so I've approached my life with gratitude most of the time. Certainly there's times I grumble, I'm human. But I think when something catastrophic like this happens, you tend to go deeper and you look inward and you say, okay, it is what it is. And I can come out of this and I have a choice. I can be miserable while I do it, or I can be thankful for what I have. And knowing that even though it might be painful and take time, I have the ability to overcome and keep going on.
I agree. I mean, I think the part that really resonated with me with what you just said, Lori, is looking inward,
Mm-hmm.
right? When these catastrophes happen, instead of us, of course, some of us still be like, oh, it could have been, would have, should have, I would have handled it this way. I'm sure that the whole 9 yards. I think the beauty in these situations that we encounter is that we have an opportunity to pause, right? And really reflect on where we started to where we are today. And I think that this is why I love storytelling. Like I can do this every single day because I'm always fascinated about how people are able to bounce back from what society deems as incurable, right? Like when you hear of different stories of people going through a traumatic brain injury, you don't always see them coming back, bouncing back better.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times you see them stuck. So I can definitely relate to what you just said, Lori, that going inward is truly where the miracle is housed if we're open to seeing it from that aspect.
Yes.
So we're going to take another quick break right here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Lori Spivey. Stay tuned.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Greg Russell. I'm the host of TechnologyTuesday.com. You can find us on the Conscious Business TV network every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the latest resources to help you make more money in your business. Join us on E360 TV. Come on.
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. Before we went to break, Lori was sharing with us how each and every one of us can take kind of the pain in our lives and really ask ourselves the question of what is this trying to teach me instead of why does this keep happening to me? Lori, for our audience who's tuning in, if they are interested in connecting with you and hearing more about your journey, is there a website or social media handle or email you can share with us today?
Absolutely. So as a result of all this, and I'm sure we'll discuss it a bit more, I did become an energy practitioner. And so my website is Energgirl LLC.com, which is ENERGGIRL LLC.com. And you can book a free 30-minute connection call with me and discuss sort of where you're at on your journey. And even if you choose not to work with me specifically, I can typically help with some tips and tools to get you started on your own wellness journey.
Excellent, excellent. So those of you who want to connect with Lori, you definitely can visit her website, connect with her, talk to her, and see how you can get that energized self back wherever you're at in your journey, right? Lori, I want to go back to something that you brought up in the last segment where you kind of talked about finding gratitude in the pain that you experienced, right? And I want to know, can you tell us how you pivoted, right, from this brain injury, right, to being innovative in discovering energetic or Reiki healing to help you?
It really took some time. So I started working with a variety of psychologists, neurologists. I was going through physical therapy. There was a lot going on all at once. And it wasn't until about a year and a half into this brain injury, I was on a cocktail of medications and things just were not clicking in my brain. I was still not capable of being around a great deal of commotion, noise. A lot of those would trigger just tears. I was not able to cope emotionally or mentally with too much stimulation. Likewise, my personality had not fully returned to what it was pre-accident. I was having outbursts and not able to control my emotions in public settings. Oftentimes was a bit, my responses were not conducive to what questioning or situationally was happening. And I was told that it was as good as it was going to get, and I was not going to be a high functioning individual as I had been. And I needed to get used to the idea that I would probably be doing something very rudimentary the rest of my life. And I remember telling my coworkers what was happening. And my boss at the time, God bless Randy for being there, said to me, you know, I have this energy practitioner. Maybe you would want to contact her. And at the time I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. And after I saw this energy practitioner twice, I was off all of the medications and my brain functionality had begun to return.
Lori, first, I'm sure that you saw my face when you brought up about, oh, this is as good as it's going to get. I literally cringe when I hear stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember at one point in my journey to where I am today, I remember being on a slew of medications. Those of you who've been following me since Grew with Portia know my journey of my first TV career, where I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and placed on 3 different strong psychotropic drugs. Well, kind of the same thing. I remember the therapist flat out said to me, "Oh, well, your brain's broken," and just all this stuff. And I wasn't buying it. I was not buying it from the very beginning. And I
Mhm.
tell, even with you, Lori, that drive, right, to keep going, right? You were determined to find a solution. So,
Mhm.
Lori, I'm curious, can you shed light on when your boss mentioned about this energy healer, right?
Mhm.
Maybe talk about some of the skepticism and limiting beliefs that you had before you jumped on it. Because I'm sure that there were a few like, well, I've tried all this other stuff.
Right.
How is this going to help me?
Yeah, and I think, it was something that I was certainly not familiar with. And so all I kept thinking is this can't be the end of my story. It cannot be. I don't want to settle for this. And so I literally went into it, Portia, not knowing what was going to happen. I knew nothing about energy work. And I just went in with an open mind thinking this has got to work because nothing else has. And so I learned a lot at that time about the fact that, energy, we're all energy, right? We all have vibration. And when you suffer injury or illness or any kind of autoimmune disease or have surgeries, all of those are broken energy connections in our body. It's like an electrical circuitry panel in your home. If a breaker trips, you don't have electricity in that outlet. And so our bodies work the same way. And to restore those connections and have energy flow where it needs to, that's the way our bodies were designed, to heal themselves. And so when there's a disconnect, it needs to be reconnected, and our bodies can do what it was intended to do in the first place.
I agree. I mean, I think for me, I remember being introduced to meditation. And I was skeptical, like, well, because I kept wanting to laugh. They're like, oh, you need to sit still and, focus on your breathing. And I'm like, in my mind, being the creative that I am, in my mind, I'm like, sitting quiet. Like I was afraid of silence. Lori, you know what I'm talking about. I'm like, sitting in quiet, like what, I'm gonna start hearing crickets? Am I gonna start hearing all the noise around me? What if somebody's stomach grumbles? What, like, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm sure that you might have had some reserves in a sense, when you went on this energetic healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
And Lori, can you maybe even talk more? Do you remember that first experience? What it was like, how you felt after?
Yeah, I do, because I remember feeling lighter, physically lighter. And I remember walking out of my very first session thinking, gosh, this is like utopic almost. I had such a good mental and physical sense of what was happening at that time. I knew I needed to understand more, learn more, and continue the path. And so that was really the catalyst that then took me through more energy work and more healing. And I will say that there was a lot of painful moments in the energy work as well. When you're going through physical healing in energy work, there can be pain associated with that because it's releasing trauma from your body that has been stored there. And your body can't tell the difference if it's, like a stressor that's imminent, or if it's something that's been stored there for quite a while. And so it reacts the same way. And it is painful for that to be released out of you.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with you, Lori. Like, I know when I go and get either Reiki, I used to get acupuncture too, I would notice a difference in the same way. And sometimes after I get Reiki done, I have to literally clear my calendar for 2 days afterwards because I feel yucky sometimes because I've let obviously things kind of sit for too long and the energy's kind of stuck and now it's coming out and I have headaches sometimes and I can count the number of times in a year I get a headache on one hand, you know. So I'm there with you. I remember like when I got acupuncture done, I remember the acupuncturist, he was funny. He said, "Oh, by the way, you can't drink water 30 minutes after to, come out your system." I'm like, I said, "Oh, this is new." Like, and they're like, "No, we're just kidding. We just tell people to give it time to get your body reset." But I'm like, "Oh, well, that'd be pretty cool." Like I drink water and kind of like you see in the cartoons, like around Halloween time, when the joke is, why didn't the skeleton cross the road? Well, he didn't have any guts, just like the reason why skeletons don't drink water, because everything goes everywhere.
Welcome to a sanctuary of healing at Energgirl LLC, where Lori Spivey's expertise in energy work transforms lives. Specializing in Reiki, reflexology, and Akashic record reading, Lori is dedicated to guiding women on a path to wellness, helping them release trauma, stress, and lingering emotional wounds. Rediscover your balance, vitality, and inner peace. Embrace a journey that rejuvenates your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Begin your transformative healing journey with Lori Spivey at Energgirl LLC. Visit energygirlllc.com to book your session and awaken to a new you.
Like my sarcasm and humor comes out organically. I tell people I inhale puns and exhale sarcasm. And I think the more, even though this show has a very quote unquote serious tone, but I incorporate my humor into it every day.
Right.
Literally.
Right.
And Lori, the other thing I'm curious, right? Like through your journey, what I'm seeing, especially for other people, right, who have been not necessarily in the boat of being hit by a drunk driver, but think about if there's a cancer diagnosis or if there is a mental health diagnosis. And a lot of times in our brain, that correlates to a death sentence for a lot of people, right? And so I'm curious now, Lori, how many years has it been since this accident? 10 years. Yay.
Yes.
10, Lori, I'm curious, since it's been 10 years, and now that you look at your journey from back then until now, what emotions come up for you?
Gratitude. I would not be here in this space helping other women heal from trauma had I not gone through what I experienced. Because healing from the brain injury and the physicality of that accident was only the beginning. When I started going through the healing process, it was a very long journey. It took several years because the deeper I went inward and explored the various parts of trauma, you find that there's a lot of grief around the trauma that you experience. And so some of those pockets of grief take longer to process and heal from than others do. And so it's very much like, peeling back the onion. There's so many layers and complexity to what we go through as humans. We can be born with ancestral trauma. We can be born with gestational trauma. And these are not things that our ancestors, said, oh, I need to pass that along. It's not like that, right? So, the DNA, let's just talk about gestational trauma. When your mother is carrying you, what is the environment? What is her nutritional, intake? Is she happy that she's pregnant? There's so many different components. And I can only speak, to my own journey, but I was 6 weeks away from being born when my 2-year-old sister died very suddenly. And within a couple of days, my mother experienced then not only the loss of her firstborn child, but her mother had a heart attack. And then she was told that I likely was not going to survive birth because of an Rh negative factor, which they didn't really have a solution for at the time. And so all of these things, that's happening in her world external to me is being digested and passed on to me. And so I'm then born with trauma through no fault of hers. It's just, what was happening at the time. And so there were layers of things that I needed to heal from as a result of that. Things that were buried deep, deep down into my core that needed to be felt and processed and let go.
Lori, you touched on a lot there. And that to me, that'll have to be part 2, because I feel like there's a wave of things that we can go into that, right? Like a lot of us don't think about, for example, with family members or our parents, right? How they have their own traumatic experiences that they've gone through. And obviously this is a generational difference, right? Like, I'm not sure, Lori, how old your mom is. My mom would have been 70 this year. So you figure my mom was born in 53. And so you figure during my mom's upbringing, right, women, in a sense, in order to have some sort of independence, they had to be married, right? And so think about how if you're married to somebody you really don't like, think about how that plays a role in how you show up in the world, how you raise your kids, how you interact with different people. We don't think about that. And that's why when I talk to some of my friends, a lot of times when they're like, oh, I have such a dysfunctional relationship with my parent or whoever. And I said, look, I get it. I understand. I said, but my best piece of advice that I can give to you is don't be upset with them. It's nothing personal against you. They're projecting what they know onto you. And it's hard. It's very, very hard, especially if you want that relationship with them, right? In some capacity, but let's be realistic. Sometimes that's just not the case. Lori, I want to touch on something really quick that you brought up about the grief journey that you were on during this time, right? Mm-hmm. Can you speak to our audience, especially the different women that you work with, about how your grief journey really, in a sense, what was kind of some of the things that you were grieving at that time outside of the injury that you endured, but also can you speak to maybe some of those thoughts that you had about maybe the loss of yourself, maybe the loss of support that you did or didn't have? Can you speak to that part from your journey?
Absolutely. I did have a lot of support. It wasn't about physical, emotional, or mental support. That was there. For me, it was as I was processing through these emotions and experiencing them, I was feeling the full breadth of grief. And so I was processing grief that I recognized as my mother and father lost their firstborn daughter. And I was feeling the grief of, them thinking that I would not live. And so there were a variety of griefs, and they weren't all mine. And sometimes there was grief that would come out that was loss of relationship or loss of me fulfilling something that I thought that I should have. And so all of these layers that you're going through, the deeper you go into these layers, the more complex you find that grief. And for things that you didn't know you were feeling, because and I say that mostly women, I know all humans do this to some extent, but mostly women tend to shove things down. We are responsible for so many other things that we put ourselves last. It was the way life was ingrained into us, right? And Not that that was a bad thing, and I'm not blaming anybody. It's the way things had been up to that point. Hopefully, the younger generations now are learning how to balance that much better. But for me, it was putting everybody else first. You had a house, you had a husband, you had children, you had job, whatever the circumstances were in your life, you had to do everything for everyone. And if there was a morsel left, then you had it for yourself. And so emotions get buried, grief gets buried, and it just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's where autoimmune diseases stem from. That's where, digestive issues stem from. That's where a lot of grief manifests. It's in physical ways. And I'm not against Western medicine, so please, understand I still see a Western doctor, but I tend to move more towards the Eastern philosophies in many components. Western doctors don't have a systemic, rationale for any autoimmune. And so it just gets thrown into that bucket.
And I want to add in here too, Lori, that I can say for me, I can always tell physically when I'm about to embark on a grief journey of some sort. And let's be realistic, even myself, as I've been through many different grief journeys in the last 2 years, I can always tell physically. For example, the first thing when I'm embarking on a grief journey that tends to say, hey, your check engine light is on, my vocals start because I can feel the heaviness in my lungs. Then the next thing I notice is I start getting back pain. Then, the insomnia starts because I'm up thinking, about all the things, but yet I'm still not honoring and facing my grief. I keep suppressing it. So this is why for me, I go to my gratitude journal a lot, especially when I'm really going through a heavy roller coaster ride of grief, like around the holiday season. I know holidays bring up a lot of emotions, right? Family traditions that have changed because loved ones are no longer here.
Yes.
Right. And then my birthday being in the middle of it, right? And not having either one of my parents present for the first year or first 2 years, right? There's a lot of things that come up. But at the same time, Lori, just like you, I find gratitude. I find gratitude in my grief journey because I feel like this has given me a purpose. It's given me a calling. And realistically, I kind of manifested it when I said I wanted to work with people in trauma and grief, but I would have never believed that this would be the avenue that I took to work with different individuals. So we're going to take another quick break right here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Lori.
Hi, I'm Julie Jones Hamilton, and my partner, Lynn Kitchen, and I co-host World's Greatest Motivators every Sunday at 4 p.m. Pacific on the Achieve channel. Come join us and the best thought leaders in the planet today, right here at E360 TV.
In the depths of loss, where do you find peace? Maria Bilenick understands your journey. Through Healing Heart, she's guiding mothers like you to find inner peace amidst grief.
Her kind, loving way of being had me heard, witnessed, and acknowledged for my pain.
Maria is committed to empowering grievers to release the myth of perfection, taking action to honor and nurture our bodies. She has a heart of gold.
Maria is lighthearted, deliciously quirky, and funny.
Join a community where your loss is understood and your healing nurtured. Together, let's navigate the labyrinth of grief, one step at a time.
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. We are joined by Lori, who has just been so generous with her time and her journey. And Lori, I commend you. I know that all the trials that you went through for the last 10 years, especially one of my biggest pet peeves is when people say, well, this is as good as it's gonna get. I'm glad that you broke through that mold, broke through that chain to continue to drive forward and find a solution to your calling. So, Lori, for our audience who is tuning in, obviously now you work with a lot of women. You kind of converted this journey, right? This tragedy into a testimony. So, Lori, how would you say now? How do you really support women in helping them to break free from what I call the brain dead algorithm?
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, that's what really is my driving motivator. And so I've created this very sacred space to hold for women who need to heal from trauma. And again, trauma comes from a variety of places, and we all experience it differently. And there's no journey that is going to be identical to somebody else's. And so I work with a lot of women who have anxiety. I work with a lot of women who are dealing with grief, and the grief is coming from a variety of places too. It could be, loss of identity or just things unrealized. But I'm always very grateful when women come in and, you can see their shoulders drop and they become comfortable, and you have a conversation with them, and then you start working with their energy. And when they begin to sob, or if they're, releasing energy, they feel it immediately, and they're in gratitude then for the fact that they're able to recognize what has happened and release it. And so I feel like my mission now is to help as many women and educate people just in how you can be successful in living your best version. And if energy practitioning is part of your journey, I'm happy to help you get started on that as well. I've got great resources. I do like to tell my clients, if you can watch Emotion 2.0, it's a great documentary. And it really talks a lot about energy, how it works. And then it has other components to it, like nutrition and different things. I remember the gentleman that was the nutritionist in this documentary was talking about, if you're feeling depressed, you need to be in the sunlight, and you need to eat pineapple and oranges because those are the colors of the sun, and it will help to change your mood. So the brain receptors that, store that part that makes you a bit depressed can be restored through those things. And so there's a lot of great, helpful things that they discuss in that. Another one is called Healing, and it's Dr. Joe Dispenza, who had suffered a horrific accident in a bicycle and shattered his spine, and was completely healed through energy work. And so there's very inspiring people, and I think that that's key, right? You want to know that there is hope, and that there is a promise that you can get better yourself, and your journey is going to be different than mine and the person next to you, but there is hope for you to overcome whatever you are facing.
Oh, I 100% agree. Like, I love the pineapples and the oranges and sitting in the sun. Lori, it's funny, when I lived out of state one time and I was looking up ways to go to sleep, because like my body is immune literally to like melatonin and all those other sleep agents, because when I was a TV producer, I had to sleep during the daytime instead of at night. Well, I looked up, I'm like, there's got to be some other alternatives for me, right? Well, would you believe that dark chocolate? You take a little square of dark chocolate and you put it under your tongue before you go to bed, and it helps you to sleep. At least it did for me for a period of time. That dark chocolate, I don't know what it is. I'm like, maybe because like dark, you think of nighttime, you rest. I don't know. I would say, look, I'm not like a doctor to recommend it, but I know it worked for me when I tried it. Excuse me, but I agree. Like, there's always another alternative, right? And like the saying goes, seeking you shall find. You never know what you'll find if you're really driven to, change the narrative, change your outcome.
Absolutely.
Lori, again, I thank you so much for your generosity and your time and sharing, with our listeners about how you went from this space of literally being hindered by so many obstacles and converting it to an opportunity. One of the pillars that I focus on, Lori, in this show is forgiveness. And a lot of that came from me being able to forgive my father for him being absent in most of my life. But through his transition, I was able to show up and be present for him. I'm curious, Lori, how did you learn to forgive not only just the doctors who gave their all to you, including the ones that says, well, this is as good as it's going to get, but how did you also learn to forgive yourself? And how can you relay that message to different women who are in that boat and struggling with that?
I think as far as the doctors go, there was never a moment where I blamed them for anything. I think scientifically they were dealing with facts and they didn't know my fortitude. And so they were going based on, sheer science. And I knew that I was going to defy the odds if it was in my ability to do so. And so I never felt angry or upset with the doctors. I always felt that they were all there to help in any capacity that they could. Forgiving myself, that's big. And that is still an ongoing process, I find. As I work with other women and I help them on their journey, there will be bits and pieces that come up for them that I realized have been unresolved in me. And so it's a great opportunity for me to learn and grow as I work with these other women. And so for me, forgiveness is a constant. And it's not until you can sit in the pain of that memory or emotion and fully understand the breadth of the lesson it was there to teach you, can you acknowledge it, thank it, and let it go. And so for me, that's when the healing occurs, is when I really sit in it and acknowledge it and then thank it for the lessons and allow it to go.
Lori, I love that because I think it really goes back to the gratitude, right? And I've said this before, that grateful people are intentional.
Mm.
And you really have to be intentional when you're forgiving, whether it's a person, whether it's yourself. You really have to be intentional, because how can you truly say that you forgive them, but then you're still, let's say a holiday rolls around or your birthday and you're still like, well, this person didn't call me. Well, you forget, right? Like, you forgave them. And I really appreciate you sharing that, Lori, because I think forgiveness is definitely similar to grief in a sense that it's ever evolving and ever changing, right? Because you're going to go through a multitude of other experiences in your life. And I love to say that, there's a book called The Game of Life. You might have heard this book, Lori, by Florence Scovel Shinn. And one of the things that she says in that book is, man is not your enemy. Man is not your friend, for man is your teacher. And if we apply that to our life, that each person, each situation, every catastrophe, every tragedy is truly a lesson for us to learn, then where truly is the loss.
That's beautifully stated. And I completely agree. Everything that happens is for us and for our good. And if we can recognize that there is always a lesson in that for us, I think we complete our journey with a lot more happiness and gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's all about shifting, right? Changing our perspective on life and changing how we, instead of going at things the way that we're accustomed, kind of like what you mentioned in our previous segment about that gestational trauma, right? If we're always going into situations with the same thought pattern, the same thought that everything's going to regurgitate the same result, then that's what you're always going to get.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Instead of going in like what you mentioned during your journey of giving this energy work a try, you're like, well, what do I have to lose?
Mm-hmm.
Going into it with an open mind and really seeing the return on investment, the result, right?
Yes.
So I definitely encourage our audience to go into today, into your day with an open mind, an open heart. Because as I mentioned in the beginning about the squirrel, right? I read in my affirmation journal again that today I will face my fears. Who would have thought that I would have had to bury a squirrel? Right? But you know what? I'm grateful because there was a lesson that was embedded in that squirrel just for me.
Right.
Well, everybody, that was Lori Spivey that you heard from on this episode of the Grief Grantor. I thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And until next time, peace and hair grease, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on the Grief Grantor. May the story shared today light your path and guide your heart toward healing. Remember, with every moment of grief, there's an opportunity for gratitude, resilience, and empowerment. Continue your journey with us online and share your own story, because in this tapestry of life, every thread matters, especially yours.